if you invest £700 a month at pretty normal market returns and do literally nothing else for 30 odd years, you will be a millionaire. Simple, easy. So here's the question then. If building wealth and ultimately becoming a millionaire really is just simple maths, why don't people actually just do it, right? Well, the reality is that it's not a maths problem. It never has been. It's a behavioral problem. And today, I want to show you the 3 fixes that absolutely close that gap. The one between knowing what to do, because we all know what to do, is really, really simple, and actually physically doing it. So let's get on with it. Right. Look, most people think that investing well and investing successfully means finding the next best stock or a great investment fund with the biggest return, right? Bigger fund, better returns, better stocks, all that sort of stuff, job done. And I get why most people would think that, right? It's probably the most intuitive assumption in the world. It's also the one that wrecks more portfolios than any sort of bad luck or bad decision ever has. Here is the pattern that I've watched play out probably more times than I could count, frankly. Someone decides they're going to do investing properly, right? Maybe they read a little bit. Maybe they've watched a YouTube video or two. And ultimately, they land on the idea that the smart move is going all in on a global index fund, 100% equities. Because if you watch any other content out there online about investing, that's supposedly what you're supposed to do, apparently. And look, for a while, it's great. A global index fund is a brilliant way to access 100% equities in your portfolio. But it's all good when the market is going up. The numbers go up. And people who invest in this sort of thing are feeling great and vindicated about everything they're doing. But then it drops 20%. Now, a 20% drop in the stock market is not a crisis. It's not even that unusual, to be honest. It's just what markets kind of do every few years. It's the same way that, British weather occasionally rains, right? But if no one's told you that in advance, or it's not right for you, and you're watching years of your contributions and money evaporate on the screen in front of you, it does not feel like normal market behavior, let me tell you. It feels like the end of the world. So what happens? They sell at the bottom and lock in that loss, that paper loss that you're seeing currently, permanently, and walk away from the whole thing telling themselves that investing doesn't work and it's rubbish, when actually that was never the problem in the first place. The mismatch is the problem. That whole concept that investments and the investment didn't match what the person could actually stomach and what was right for them. And when those two don't line up, you will bail at exactly the worst possible moment. Every single time. I've seen it 100 times. Now, the fix here isn't complicated at all. It's as easy as just investing in the global equity indexes. It's probably just investing in something like a multi-asset fund instead. That's just one fund that holds a mix of shares and bonds together at a set proportion. So you're not betting every single pound on the stock market alone. Think of something like the Vanguard LifeStrategy. That's a really popular one here in the UK, where the number is literally in the name, 60, 80, whatever it is. It tells you exactly how much of that pot is in the stock market versus kind of more stable, less volatile stuff like bonds, for instance. Here's how that mix actually works underneath. So shares, the stock market, they're the engine, right? That's where all the growth comes from over time. But it's a bumpy old ride, right? That's the trade-off. That'll swing hard in both directions, up and down. Your money can go up and down by 20, 30% in a year pretty easily. Now, bonds are the kind of calmer cousin, right? Lower growth, yes, absolutely. But they steady the ride typically when the stock market is having a bad year or a bad time. So it's a trade-off. It's all a trade-off, plain and simple. add more bonds into your investments and you give up some of that top end return, but you get a lot less volatility in exchange. And that kind of trade-off is literally the whole point, because none of this works if you can't stay in the game long enough for it to pay off. That is the whole thing in a nutshell, literally. I would rather that you got 6% a year for 30 years than 10% in 1 year, watch it drop by 30% the next year and panic sell at the bottom. So the $1 million question, how much equity should you actually hold in your investment? Well, there's no right or wrong answer to that, but really it comes down to sort of 3 things, okay? Your attitude towards risk, which is basically how you feel about volatility and the number going up and down in your account. Your capacity for loss, meaning how an actual drop would hit your real life in terms of material impact, not just kind of how you feel or your mood on that day. And lastly, your time horizon, right? How long that money has got to actually sit there before you need it. Now, line those 3 up properly, and it tells you almost exactly how much equity risk you should be taking, right? Not too much, not too little. I've actually built a free risk profiler tool that walks you through all of this and all of these 3 points and helps you understand what sort of equity risk level might work for you. Again, it's not advice, do your own research, but it's a really useful tool. So links in the description if you want to run your own situation through it. So, of course, this whole thing could look completely different depending on who you are, right? So a 25-year-old with 40 years ahead of them can ride out a 20% drop without blinking if they've got the right attitude, because time does the recovering for them. Someone 5 years from retirement watching the same drop is in a different conversation point entirely. Same market, different reality, right? But this is so important because the actual goal here, it's never chasing the highest return possible. It drives me crazy, all of this. The actual goal is staying invested long enough for compounding to quietly get on and do the job that it's supposed to do in the background. There's no medals. There's no prize for taking lots of risk with your money and then bailing out before it's even had a chance to do its thing. But look, even the perfectly matched portfolio does absolutely nothing for you if you stop feeding it after 3 months or something, which, funnily enough, is exactly where most people fall down next, which is on to fix 2, automate. So willpower never enters the equation. Right, I'll be honest with you here, because this probably makes the point better than sort of any client story possibly could. I am absolutely hopeless at anything that needs doing the same way every single week without fail. My partner could tell you about the bins. Well, for instance, actually don't ask her about the bins. Long story, right? Here's the thing. That exact kind of predictable unreliability is why every contribution into my own investments and my pensions and stuff like that happens automatically on a set day without me having to lift a finger or make a single decision about it. It's all laid out before I have any decisions to make. Now, that's not necessarily just a personal quirk to me, right? That is how willpower works with everyone, including you. You know it does. Willpower runs on motivation, energy, mood, right? Whatever's left over after a long week. And all of these points kind of move around constantly, don't they, right? Some months you're switched on, you're organized. Other months you're just exhausted, distracted, or the car's failed its MOT and investing is the last thing on your mind, right? It's what always happens. So actually think about what manual investing or manual saving each month asks you to actually do. You have to remember it's the first of the month. You've got to log in. You've got to decide how much feels affordable this time. Then physically move your money across yourself. That is kind of at least 4 separate moments when you can kind of like talk yourself out of it all, right? 4 separate points of failure. Automated investing and saving and growing removes every single one. the money leaves before you've even seen it land. So there's no decision left to make and nothing to kind of let you talk yourself out of. So this is a really interesting point. The advisor who initially trained me, he was quite an old school guy, right? He's the type who sort of write everything down by hand long after we'd all gone digital and it was all, AI and all that sort of stuff. He said something quite early on that I never really let go of, I would say. He said that clients who built the most wealth, they weren't necessarily the ones that were like best with money or the most sophisticated. They were the ones who'd made it impossible to forget about or be bad with money. And I thought that was a pretty strange way at the time to describe good investing and saving and building wealth. But it turns out that is literally the whole game. Look, think of this whole thing as like a direct debit to the person that you're going to be in like 20 years time. Nobody wakes up excited to pay the phone bill, but it goes out anyway, every month, whether you're in a rush or skin or whatever. Your future wealth needs exactly the same treatment, not enthusiasm that comes and goes, just a system that doesn't ask your permission. It's so key. Now, I know what some of you are thinking about all of this, and I've heard lots of arguments about this whole thing. Doesn't automating everything mean giving up control? Yeah, it does. And that's precisely the point, right? Control is exactly what derails most people, because control means there's always a moment where you could stop, or pause, or talk yourself out of it when the markets wobble or things go down or your life changes. Take that decision out of your hands entirely and you literally physically cannot make the wrong decision. It's literally impossible. Now, automation only solves half the problem in my experience. It gets the money moving, but it doesn't stop you from quitting 6 months in because nothing looks like it's happening for you and you're losing motivation. Here is something that I have pretty much noticed after, 15 years of doing this now with people. People don't quit investing because of the maths or the processes or anything else like that letting them down. They quit because it feels, for genuinely months at a time, like absolutely nothing is happening at all, right? It's a real problem because motivation needs something to look at, right? Without visible proof of that thing actually working, boredom creeps in, then kind of doubt follows close behind. And both of those two tend to arrive really early on in your journey, between like 3 to 4 months in my experience. I see this a lot. People start with great intentions, and because they're not tracking it, they're not aware of it, they lose a little bit of their sort of motivation to keep it all going. So I remember looking at my own numbers, right? First few years into investing and genuinely feeling, I would say, pretty deflated early on in my journey, like months of contributions and working really, really, really hard. And it felt like the total in the investment account barely looked any different from just putting money into a regular savings account or something like that. I genuinely, at the point, nearly convinced myself that the whole thing wasn't even worth it. I was like, I need to save more money to get a bigger lump sum to then invest it. I almost convinced myself that that was true, despite seeing every single day with the clients that I was working with that obviously it is worth it, right? Then what I did is I remember thinking to myself, I'm not really sure about this. I pulled up figures from the 12 months earlier and I sat them right next to each other from where I was now. And the gap between the two was absolutely massive. It hadn't felt like progress kind of week to week, right? But looking back over a full year, it very clearly was. So the fix in this case is simple. Start tracking it. Start tracking like your net worth or your investment growth on a regular basis, not obsessively, just often enough to actually see that line moving, essentially. Even, and more importantly so, when it's moving slowly. Progress you can see is progress you're going to stick with, right? That's the entire difference between the person who gives up at year 2, convinced that it isn't working, and the person who kind of looks up at year 20 and realizes that they're genuinely a millionaire. The maths was never the hard part. It never is. Matching the strategy to how you actually behave and believe, that's the part that separates the people who talk about wealth and the people who actually quietly, regularly, consistently move towards the goal of actually building it. Risk aligned to your reality, contributions on autopilot, and progress that you can actually see. That is it, genuinely. But there is one other huge problem that I see consistently with this. And it's not understanding that there is one absolutely critical point, in a point of time, essentially, in your wealth building journey that makes a massive difference to the overall picture. Which is why, genuinely, you need to watch this video here next, because I go through the most dangerous decade in wealth building and how you can avoid it, importantly. Not only that, but how you can actually use it to your advantage. So give it a click and I will see you